2025 saw an unprecedented slashing of international aid.
We've lost between 25 and 40% of our funding in just over a year, so the choices we're making are really tough.
Countries such as the UK, Germany and particularly the United States reduced total contributions by more than €13 billion. In the US, the Trump administration effectively shut down and dismantled US aid.
Every penny that we spend in foreign aid needs to be in furtherance and aligned with the national interest.
It also closed its borders to people from some of the countries most in need.
It's a permanent pause on third world migration, including from hellholes like Afghanistan, Haiti, Somalia, and many other countries. I didn't say shithole, you did.
But decisions made at cabinet tables and soundbites at podiums have real consequences for vulnerable people whose very existence is dependent on what humanitarian aid can provide. One place where those consequences are all too visible is Dadaab in Kenya, Africa's largest refugee camp near the border with Somalia, open since 1992. The word camp is perhaps a misnomer. This is a complex of 4 huge settlements, Hagadira, Dagaheli, Ifo 1 and Ifo 2, with a combined population of 418,000 and rising. The majority of families here have come across the border from Somalia, a country that has endured more than 30 years of protracted war and terrorism, as well as severe drought and food insecurity. Generations of refugees have grown up here, but as life becomes harsher under aid cuts, increasing numbers of young people are considering escaping the camp through dangerous routes in the hope of finding a better life in Europe.
The situation has been strict encampment for refugees, which means you come into the camp, you're registered in the camp, you stay in the camp. So all of that kept people in what we would say dependency. It is what you would say a warehousing of people. So people are here for years upon years. Now it's almost second, third generation of people just depending on humanitarian aid.
Aden Abdi Ibrahim is a young journalist who moved to the camp from Somalia to escape al-Shabaab. He has lived here since without his family. He broadcasts on Radio Gagar, the local station which keeps refugees in the camp up to date, but also allows them to phone in to discuss their own problems, making it a vital conduit for the pressing issues facing the community.
There's a lot of concerns and, grievances coming from the community, including recently we have had people complaining lack of water, people complaining, the reduction made in terms of food. We are facing severe anger, children malnourished. A number of women have shared with us some videos saying like we lost our children. Some of them are being held in Libya for ransom, asking money. Some of them risk their life to just in search of better life in Europe.
It's all indicative of a system under strain. Even providing enough basic food for everybody is no longer possible. Over the last year, the Kenyan government, World Food Programme and UNHCR have had to overhaul how they distribute food in the camp, creating a system of differentiated assistance, essentially placing refugees into 4 categories, depending on need. Category 1 received the most assistance. Those in Category 4 now receive no food or cash allowances. This is the World Food Programme distribution point where refugees from the Ifo camp come to collect a basic food allowance. This used to be a monthly occurrence, but since last year's international aid cuts, it's now been moved to once every 2 months. Not only that, but the amount of food each family receives has been cut, and the people receiving it say it simply isn't enough.
We used to receive wheat flour, and oil was not little, also rice and the soap, but now there is no soap, there is no wheat flour, so things have changed a lot. Yeah, and the food is little. Some even are not receiving the food.
Tell me how much food you collected here today.
Collected oil, pearls and sorghum.
And that has to last for 2 months?
Yeah.
And how many in the family?
5.
Is it easy or difficult to make this food last for 2 months?
It's very difficult.
Tell me about it. What is difficult? What happens because of this?
The food doesn't last. At least it can last half a month or 1 month. Then the other month is very hard to sustain.
The cuts to food distributed has led directly to rising cases of malnourishment, as many families simply don't have enough to eat. A programme providing additional food to support pregnant and breastfeeding mothers has been discontinued. The consequences are seen in this hospital in Hagadira, the largest of the refugee camps.
The malnutrition caseload has been increasing over time with several drivers in place, among them being the food insecurity issue driven by the categorization of refugees based on their vulnerabilities. We have many malnourished cases because they cannot access food anymore, and they end up into our programs.
Here in the malnutrition ward, supplies of therapeutic milk have become intermittent. It's often not available, meaning mothers need to stay longer here with their babies. This woman's son became ill and lost weight rapidly.
I bring the baby to the hospital. When he started vomiting and diarrhea, his weight went down.
This mother's young child is malnourished. She says the family don't have enough to eat.
We don't have any work. My husband has no work.
This mother has come to the hospital 7 times with her malnourished daughter. She has 7 children and is homeless, at the moment staying with a relative.
The baby has malnutrition. She's 3 years old, but she doesn't look like 3 years because of malnutrition. I've been to the hospital 7 times to help her, but she doesn't eat any food.
It's currently not enough, so if the funding cuts continue like this, we'll continue to anticipate reduced capacity with respect to our ability to supply essential drugs and therapeutic products.
In the same hospital complex is a gender-based violence unit funded entirely by Irish Aid. They too have seen a rise in the number of women being treated here, which they say is another effect caused by the scarcity of resources.
There has definitely been an increase in sexual exploitation and abuse and gender-based violence, especially intimate partner violence, because higher stresses in the household. People are fighting over the resources and the needs there are. Also, there are persons who take advantage, of course, of vulnerable persons who are in need, especially during distributions and such. So that is definitely an increased risk. And on top of that, we had a higher number of gang rape, especially when differentiated assistance just came in, because people would target households that are women-headed households, because they would be receiving supplies and they would break in, and then rape would then happen and take advantage of them in that way. We have received a lot of cases of children being abandoned in dump sites. So the women will give birth, but they do not have the resources to take care of them. So we receive a lot of abandonment cases of very young infants as well.
The prospects for young people in the camps are not hopeful. While 84% of refugees living here have received no schooling, education can provide a route to a better future. But like every other part of life here, schools are feeling the impact of cuts. Cuts have meant a reduction in funding for education, fewer teachers, less resources.
So without enough teachers, then the teachers who are there may not be able to reach to each and every learner and offer quality education.
So these learners, when they came to Kenya to settle as refugees, they have a lot of past trauma from the war, from where they came from. So they really take a lot of time trusting us, and they always require a lot of help.
I wanted to be near a doctor so that I will know more about health to assist for other communities. For me, I'm a refugee. If I get a scholarship and perform well, it's okay. But if I don't, I need someone to help me paying that.
The population of refugees is now very high. So the top most performing students are the ones that are given the scholarships. So the rest, they remain in the refugee camps.
It's very difficult for you to find a job just with a minimum secondary level education. Some of them will now be forced to stay back in the camp, and they are not going to get a dignified way of life in terms of seeking for job opportunities.
Within the camps, there is very little employment. Some refugees provide services for cash. A small number are awarded business licenses and can set up small shops or market stalls. These are turbulent times, and the internal camp economy has not been immune to the impact of aid cuts. Before the cuts happened last year, aid agencies provided the refugee community with small amounts of money called bamba chakula, which could be spent in registered shops. The programme was suspended briefly, but when it returned, it was for less money, meaning two things: that refugees could afford to buy less food in the stores, but also that business owners were receiving less money. If things continue like this, what will happen to the business?
Business is very low now, as you can see. No one is coming to the market. People have no money.
Many of the Somalis in Kenya have arrived here because of the threat of Al-Shabaab, the Islamic terror group that controls 30% of Somali territory and is active here in Dadaab. Hundreds of thousands of Somalis have fled Africa entirely. In the 5 years to 2025, more than 5,000 people from Somalia claimed asylum in Ireland. It's become one of our top countries of origin for international protection applicants. One of those granted asylum was Abdi Kadir Mohammed. He left the camp because of death threats from Al-Shabaab and now works as a civil servant in Dublin. His family remains in Dadaab, but he says he can never return for fear of his safety. Technology can perhaps make the distance feel smaller, but no less painful for the family.
My name is Laila. I'm coming here in 1992. We live here. So.
Why is it difficult?
This life, if you are not working here, is a problem. If you don't have to buy something, it's very hard. So nobody is working here. My mother, even they're sick, it cannot work. The young sister is here, even they're sick. The age is 10 and he cannot work.
Tell me now about Abdi Kadir.
The first time he studied in Kenya and through scholarship went to university in Turkey. When he came back, he started work, but he couldn't continue due to fear of being attacked and killed by terrorists. We would love to live together, but I don't think it is possible.
The 16 members of Abdi Kadir's family have been put in Category 4, which means they no longer receive food or money aid.
There's a lot of problems inside the refugee camp here. This life is so hard. The refugee provisions such as food, health, water that we used to get, we don't anymore due to cutbacks.
A huge number of people in the Dadaab complex have lived their lives here without ever leaving. The Kenyan government has a long-term plan to integrate the camp into the local community, giving the refugees more rights to work and to move freely. Now cuts to international aid have put this plan in serious jeopardy. Abdullah is an ambitious young man who has written a book about his life as a refugee.
You know, this idea of writing a book came to my mind when I was very young. I had so many issues during that time, but I never gave up.
But Abdullah says he won't stay in the camp, waiting for the rest of his life to start.
You know, I feel like my dreams are trapped, circumstances that are beyond my control. And this reality is pushing me to make a very painful decision, and that's illegal immigration, to just as a possible path to access higher education opportunities in abroad. I know it's not about, you know, chasing an easy life or wealth and luxury, something like that. It's just a way of getting scholarship. I know the risks, the danger it involves, but the major one is loss of life. You will travel all the way to Libya, and when you go there, those people there will capture you. If you're not able to pay, then they will finish you, and then they will sell your body parts like the kidneys and the liver. And that's the end of you.
The disillusionment. Your parents were born in the camp to parents who are born in the camp, and you have nothing to put to the table, and you're looking at your prospects, and the chances for resettlement are less than 1%. So then a young person who has gone to school, they feel disillusioned. They feel, what if I try to make my way through Libya and to Europe? And there are people who lure them on phone, and they find ways. You hear people left the house at night, in the midnight. So in the morning, parents wake up and find their young people have left. And then they start receiving messages when these young people are in Libya with people demanding for money. Since the funding cuts, I can say that it is significantly increased in people who are willing to take this risk.
Official resettlement of refugees fell globally by more than half in 2025. In 2024, the United States took 2,700 refugees living in Kenya and officially resettled them in America. In 2025, this fell to just 120. For those willing to take the risk, there are well-worn routes out of Dadaab and into Europe or the Middle East, the main one being through Libya. It's now considered one of the most deadly travel routes in the world. The so-called Northern Route takes refugees through Ethiopia, Sudan and on into Libya before crossing the Mediterranean into Europe. There are reports of refugees leaving Dadaab and being captured in Libya or the Sahara Desert by criminal gangs who then attempt to extort their families. We met with one mother of 8.
My firstborn daughter was laboring for another family, and one day she didn't come home. I didn't see her for 3 days because she was trafficked and her phone was off. We could not contact her, and then we got a call from smugglers from Libya. He said I have to send him $18,000 or we'll slaughter her. So now I am a troubled mother, missing her daughter. I don't sleep at night. Often I walk around looking for money. I am a troubled mother whose daughter is held for ransom. They want money for my daughter, or they threaten they will slaughter her. They called me asking for that money. I told them I don't have money. I am struggling to feed myself, so how can I get this money? They said they don't care where I get the money. You have to bring the money, or we will kill your daughter. And you see how they brutalize her in the video. I can't watch the video. I can't bear watching it. I don't know where this beating is happening. I'm in this refugee camp. They say it is called the Blood Yard, but I don't know where it is.
Fatima received this video last month. She asked us to show it so that people could see the reality. As of now, she doesn't know if her daughter is alive or dead. And she's not the only case. The past year has seen record numbers of migrants in Libya. Many parents in the camp have received similar videos of their children being beaten and tortured with the same demands for money. Officials say that it is becoming an increasing problem as resettlement to other countries has dropped.
We have quite a number of abduction cases in the camp with people being abducted to countries such as Libya and families being asked for ransom, which has been very difficult to address because of our porous borders. We do have people, the community is aware that the US is not taking in people as much as they would, and there is interest in them moving to other countries instead.
Decisions made thousands of miles away have shaped the crisis now being felt every day in Dadaab. Less food, rising malnutrition, and cuts to healthcare and education. But the consequences don't stop at the camp. They're pushing people to leave, towards Europe, some as far as Ireland. And even when the only way out is the most dangerous one, more and more are willing to take the risk, even when they know that it can end in pain, torture, and tragedy.